The ocean was dark that night. Cold waves rolled under the moonlight, hitting the side of a small German U-boat as it moved silently across the Atlantic. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. Metal pipes rattled. The smell of oil floated in the narrow space. The crew had been underwater for many hours, watching and waiting for ships to appear. Their orders were simple: stop the flow of supplies reaching Britain, break the lifeline, starve the island, crush its will. For a time it seemed possible. Many nights the sea felt empty. Many times German captains believed the Atlantic belonged to them alone. But then something strange began to happen. The sea slowly filled with shadows, long dark shapes moving across the water. More and more of them. Ships that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Ships that came faster than they could be sunk. Ships that did not stop coming. One German officer leaned forward and whispered to his captain, "Where are they all coming from?" His captain did not answer, because he did not know. This is the story of how those ships were born. How a nation known for cars, farms, and quiet towns suddenly became the greatest war factory the world had ever seen. How ordinary workers, men and women, young and old, turned steel, sweat, and hope into a vast armada that crossed the oceans and crushed the dreams of Nazi Germany. It is a story of industry, courage, fear, and human will. A story of noise and fire inside giant factories. A story of people who never saw the battlefield, yet shaped the battlefield itself. Perhaps this is also the story of how victory was not only earned by soldiers with guns, but by workers with tools. People whose names we may never know, but whose hands changed history. Before this transformation, America was not ready for war. The country was still recovering from the Great Depression. Many factories were quiet. Many people were looking for work. Life was slow, peaceful. But beneath the surface, something powerful was hidden. An unrealized strength, like a great engine waiting to be switched on. And far across the ocean, a storm was already spreading across Europe. Germany, under Adolf Hitler, had taken control of country after country. Poland fell. France fell. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, all taken in a wave of destruction that shocked the world. Britain alone stood against the Nazi Empire, but it was struggling. Bombs fell over London. U-boats hunted British supply ships, sinking them faster than they could be replaced. Food, fuel, and weapons became harder to find. The island needed help or it would collapse. America watched, worried but distant, still outside the war. But on December 7, 1941, everything changed. When Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor, the quiet engine inside America woke up. It shook off its peaceful sleep, and it began to roar. Factories that once made cars now prepared to make tanks. Plants that once made household goods prepared to make guns and bullets. Shipyards that once built slow, careful vessels suddenly aimed to build a new kind of ship. A simple, strong, fast-to-produce cargo ship that could carry huge amounts of supplies across the ocean. These ships would be called Liberty ships. But no one, not even the strongest believers, imagined that America could build one ship every 4 days. And later even faster. To understand how this miracle happened, we must first step back into a very different world. A world where the future of freedom truly depended on steel, fire, and the hands of millions of workers. We must hear the echoes of the factories, feel the heat of the furnaces, and walk through the shipyards where sparks flew like stars in the night. Imagine a vast factory floor stretching as far as the eye can see. The smell of hot metal fills the air. Sparks jump from welding torches. Giant cranes lift heavy steel plates into place. Workers shout to one another above the roaring machines. Many of them have never built ships before. Some were farmers last year. Some worked in small shops. Some were women who had never imagined stepping into a heavy industrial job. Yet here they were, inside a world of smoke, sound, and steel, shaping the future one piece at a time. But this powerful scene did not appear overnight. It was born slowly, then suddenly. Before the war, the idea of building a Liberty ship was almost unbelievable. Traditional shipbuilding took months, sometimes even more than a year. Ships were built piece by piece with careful crafting. German U-boats felt confident that even if they destroyed dozens of ships, the Allies could never replace them in time. The Nazis believed they could starve Britain. And they almost did. But in America, a different kind of leader stepped forward. A man who did not come from the Navy or politics or old shipbuilding traditions. His name was Henry Kaiser. He was a builder of dams, of highways, of huge projects that seemed too big to imagine. He believed in moving fast. He believed in doing the impossible by breaking old rules. When the war began, he had a bold idea. What if we build ships like cars? What if we build them with an assembly line? People laughed. Some said it was impossible. Others said it was foolish. But Kaiser didn't stop. He took massive land by the water and turned it into shipyards almost overnight. He divided shipbuilding into hundreds of smaller tasks. Instead of building one ship slowly, he built many parts at the same time, then brought them together like giant puzzle pieces. This was not just innovation. This was reinvention. And slowly the rhythm of America began to change. The sound of steel cutting. The thundering of machines. The footsteps of workers moving in long lines. The whistle that marked the start of each shift. The glow of welding sparks lighting the cold nights. The smell of paint, of oil, of metal heated to the point of glowing red. It felt like the country had become a giant heart, beating faster and faster, pumping life into the war effort. Every piece of steel mattered. Every bolt. Every hour. Every worker. And across the ocean, the German Navy had no idea what was coming. These Liberty ships, built in 4 days, would soon rise from the waters one after another until the sea was filled with them. They would carry tanks, planes, food, medicine, and hope. They would turn the Atlantic from a German hunting ground into a path of Allied survival. Some stories say that at one point German U-boat captains stopped sending exact numbers back to Berlin. Not because they wanted to hide information, but because the numbers made no sense. They sank some ships only to find twice as many replacing them. They attacked at night and found convoys growing larger every week. They did not know that factories thousands of miles away were working day and night, without pause, without fear, without rest. Perhaps this was where the end truly began for Nazi Germany, not on a battlefield but on a factory floor. This is where our journey begins. The story of America's war factories cannot be told without understanding the world that existed before they rose. It was a world full of fear, uncertainty, and deep shadows stretching across Europe. Germany had prepared for war long before anyone else. Its factories turned out tanks, planes, and submarines with cold precision. Its armies moved quickly, swallowing nations like a dark wave rolling over the land. By 1940, most of Europe was under Nazi rule or trembling in fear of it. On the seas, the German U-boats hunted silently. They traveled deep underwater, waiting for enemy ships to cross their path. They struck without warning, firing torpedoes that exploded with fire and foam. British ships sank one after another. Sometimes, whole convoys disappeared below the waves. The ocean was turning into a graveyard of broken steel. Britain was running out of supplies. Food, fuel, ammunition, medicine. Everything came by sea, and everything was being destroyed faster than it could be brought in. The British people stood strong, but they were tired. Their nights were filled with the sound of bombs. Their days were filled with smoke and rubble. They needed help fast, and the help had to come from across the ocean. But at that time, America was still waking up from the long pain of the Great Depression. Many factories were silent. Many people were unemployed. Some had lost hope. The idea of becoming the world's strongest war machine felt almost impossible. Yet deep inside the country, the potential was enormous. America had more factories, more resources, and more workers than any other nation on Earth. All it needed was a spark to ignite this sleeping giant. That spark arrived at Pearl Harbor. When American sailors struggled in the burning water, and smoke rose from broken battleships, something powerful shifted in the hearts of millions. The country was no longer watching the war. It was now a part of it. And the people understood that everything had to change. Factories that once made toys, radios, refrigerators, or farming tools were suddenly asked to make guns, shells, engines, and aircraft. Companies that had never built anything for war had to learn quickly, because the time was short and the enemy was strong. It felt like the entire nation took a deep breath, and then moved together. Inside giant steel mills, furnaces glowed like molten suns. Workers shoveled coal, dragged heavy chains, and shaped red-hot metal into plates and beams. In aircraft factories, women tightened bolts on shiny new planes, worked with drills and rivet guns, and watched as wings slowly took shape. In tank factories, engines roared for the first time. Sparks flew as welders sealed the armor. The floor shook each time a new tank rolled off the line. And then there were the shipyards. Perhaps nowhere else did the war factories shine as brightly as they did where Liberty ships were born. Miles of land were covered with steel plates, crane towers, scaffolding, and unfinished hulls. Trucks moved back and forth carrying supplies. Workers in heavy gloves and goggles carried welding equipment. The air smelled of metal dust and burning fuel. The sound of hammering, drilling, and cutting echoed across the docks day and night. Henry Kaiser's shipyards changed everything. He believed shipbuilding should not be slow and careful. It should be fast, efficient, and predictable like making cars but much bigger. His workers did not build one ship from start to finish. They built thousands of pieces at once, then brought them together in one powerful rhythm. Big steel plates became sections. Sections became blocks. Blocks became giant parts of a ship's hull. These parts were placed together like puzzle pieces, welded with long streams of fire. Sometimes the workers were covered in sparks, but they did not slow down. They kept going shift after shift, day after day. For many workers this was more than a job. It was a mission. They knew every bolt, every weld, every piece of steel mattered. Each ship they built meant more food for Britain. More tanks for the front lines. More medicine for wounded soldiers. More equipment for the air forces. Each ship meant one step closer to stopping the Nazi advance. When the first Liberty ships were launched, they were slow and not beautiful. They were simple and strong, made for carrying supplies, not for showing off. But something strange happened. The workers grew proud of them. They watched each launch with cheers, feeling the ground shake as the new ship entered the water. Some workers cried. Some saluted. Many felt, for the first time in their lives, that they were shaping the world. The first Liberty ships took months to build. Then weeks. Then days. Soon Kaiser's yards were building a ship every 4 days. And the faster they built, the faster the workers learned. They built with confidence, with speed, and with the belief that what they were doing would save lives. Across the ocean, German U-boat commanders were confused. They sank ships, but more appeared. They attacked convoys, but the convoys kept growing. Reports reached Berlin that American production was increasing far beyond expectations. Hitler did not believe it at first. He thought it was propaganda. He thought America was too slow, too soft, too distant to win an industrial war. But every week, new Liberty ships crossed the ocean. And every week, the German commanders felt more pressure. They counted the ships sinking beneath the waves, but they also counted the ships rising from American docks, and the second number was always higher. There is an old saying, wars are won by soldiers but supplied by workers. In this war, the workers became an invisible army. They did not hold rifles. They held welders, hammers, and tools. They fought not with bullets but with endurance. And in many ways their fight was just as hard. The factories were loud, hot, dangerous places. Workers spent long hours standing, lifting heavy objects, and repeating the same motions until their muscles burned. Some shifts lasted through the night. Families saw each other only during brief meals. Some workers slept in small rooms near the factory because the travel time home would waste precious minutes. Yet despite the exhaustion, the factories did not stop. During breaks, workers stood outside in cold air, drinking coffee and wiping sweat from their faces. They talked about their children, about their husbands fighting overseas, about the letters they received. Some talked about fear. Some talked about hope. But most talked about work, the next ship, the next job, the next deadline. They pushed each other, knowing every delay could cost lives abroad. In these shipyards, something else important happened. America's workforce changed forever. Women entered heavy industry by the millions. African American workers were hired in large numbers. Immigrants, students, and retired men joined too. For the first time, people from different backgrounds worked side by side toward one goal. The war factories were not perfect places. There were arguments, tensions, and mistakes. But in many ways, they were the first truly united workplaces in American history. This unity became a hidden strength, one the Nazi leadership never understood. Back on the Atlantic, things were slowly shifting. Convoys grew larger. Escorts became stronger. Radar and sonar improved. U-boats still attacked, but their victories became fewer. Some German commanders wrote in their logs that the sea itself felt different. No longer quiet, no longer empty. A sense of pressure hung over them, like the ocean was turning against them. One commander wrote, "The Americans build ships like we build bread." Another wrote, "We are not fighting ships anymore. We are fighting factories." He was right. The factory floor, not the battlefield, became the place where the war's turning point was forged. It happened not in one dramatic moment, but in millions of small moments. A weld completed correctly, a piece of steel cut on time, a worker choosing to stay for 1 extra hour, a machine repaired quickly, a new idea tested and approved. Thousands of small choices. Millions of small actions. Together they created a force greater than any bomb or bullet. The Liberty ships were only the beginning. The Liberty ships were only the beginning. As America's factories expanded, the entire meaning of industrial power began to change. A country once known for peaceful production, cars, farm tools, radios, clothing, was now reshaping itself into something much larger. Something that felt unstoppable. It was as if every machine, every worker, every beam of steel became part of a huge engine that pushed the Allies toward survival. In massive aircraft factories, planes came off assembly lines like golden birds gleaming under bright lights. Their wings were polished smooth, their engines tested with deep, rumbling sounds that shook the floors. Workers watched with pride as each plane rolled forward, ready to take flight into a dangerous sky. Tank factories produced armored vehicles that rumbled out of long assembly halls. Their tracks clanked softly on the concrete as they moved toward the loading trains. Workers often paused just to touch the side of a tank, feeling the cold surface and imagining it helping soldiers thousands of miles away. Ammunition factories filled countless wooden crates with bullets, shells, and bombs. The smell of gunpowder mixed with machine oil created an unforgettable scent, sharp, metallic, full of purpose. Even small factories that once made kitchen pans or toy parts now produced essential pieces for bigger machines of war. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was too small to matter. Across the country, posters covered walls and streets. "We can do it. Women at work. United we win." These messages were not just words. They became fuel. They reminded people that every shift and every sacrifice meant their country was getting stronger. Families learned to live on fewer goods so that more could go to the military. People saved metal, rubber, and even cooking grease to support production needs. Children collected scrap metal. Teachers talked about the importance of the war effort. Communities held drives to gather supplies. It felt like the entire country moved with one heartbeat. Yet even with all this effort, the Atlantic Ocean remained one of the most dangerous places in the world. German U-boats still hunted Allied ships. The cold, black water hid them like shadows. British sailors scanned the waves constantly. American convoys learned to travel closely together, surrounded by escort ships with depth charges ready. Many sailors never returned home. Many ships never reached their destination. But each time a vessel was lost, another one stood ready to take its place. That was the power of the war factories. They turned despair into determination. They replaced loss with strength. There was a time early in the war when British leaders feared they would run out of ships completely. The U-boat attacks were so intense that the ocean looked like it belonged to Germany. Some historians believe that if America's factories had not stepped in, Britain might have fallen to starvation and isolation. But something changed around 1942 and 1943. The tide did not turn with one great battle or one brilliant strategy. It turned slowly, almost quietly, through sheer numbers. More ships, more planes, more tanks, more repaired equipment, more trained workers. And behind all of this was the power of the shipyards. Henry Kaiser's shipyards became symbols of hope. Newspapers wrote about the workers who broke shipbuilding speed records. Photos showed long lines of Liberty ships being built at the same time. People outside the war effort began to visit these shipyards just to see the miracle with their own eyes. They saw workers moving like parts of a living machine, organized, focused, and full of energy. They saw cranes swinging heavy steel sections across the open air. They saw torches sending showers of sparks down the sides of unfinished hulls. They heard the deep echo of metal plates being hammered into place. Even when rain soaked the yards or cold winter winds blew across the docks, the workers stayed. They covered themselves in jackets and scarves, but their hands kept moving. They wiped sweat off their faces with dirty gloves. They drank hot coffee in fast gulps during short breaks. And then they returned to the work that felt bigger than any one life. Women played an especially important role. They became welders, riveters, painters, and machine operators. Many had never worked outside the home before. But when the war began, they stepped forward without hesitation. Their hands steadied tools. Their eyes focused on perfect lines. Their work was as strong and skilled as anyone else's. Some newspapers called them the women who built victory. They deserved that title. African American workers also joined the shipyards and factories in large numbers. At first, they faced discrimination and unfair treatment. But as demand grew, factories opened their doors wider. Training programs expanded. Skilled black workers became welders, machinists, foremen, and supervisors. Their contribution was essential, not secondary. Immigrants and older workers also played their part. Some men in their 50s and 60s returned to work after years of retirement. They could not fight on the front lines, but they could still hold tools. They could still teach younger workers. They could still feel useful. Together, these millions of people formed a new kind of army, one that fought without guns but with grit and unity. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, German U-boat commanders felt a shift they could not fully explain. Their attacks were becoming harder. Their hunts became longer. Their torpedoes struck ships, but those losses no longer hurt the Allies the way they once did. For every ship sunk, two more arrived. For every convoy attacked, a larger one sailed the next week. German reports became filled with frustration. Some commanders wrote about feeling hopeless. They said the ocean felt crowded, a strange description of something so vast. They noticed the skies had more Allied aircraft. The convoys were better protected. They realized the Americans had found a way to build faster than Germany could destroy. One German admiral finally admitted something that changed how historians view the war. He said, "We lost the Battle of the Atlantic not at sea, but in American shipyards." That statement, simple and honest, held a powerful truth. The real battle was fought with steel, sweat, and time. Inside the factories, the rhythm never stopped. Workers moved from one shift to another like waves in motion. Machines rattled, roared, and hissed. The air was filled with a deep vibration that touched the bones. People came home from work exhausted, their bodies aching, their clothes stained with grease and dust. But many said they had never felt more proud. Some workers pinned photographs of soldiers, sons, husbands, brothers, to the walls near their stations. It reminded them who they were working for. It reminded them that every minute mattered. At night, when the factories glowed from the inside like giant lanterns, some towns nearby looked brighter than cities. You could see the orange light flooding out of windows. The sky above shimmered with sparks from welding and cutting machines. Trains bringing supplies arrived at all hours, blowing whistles into the night. Even people who did not work in the factories felt their presence. They heard the noise. They felt the vibration. They saw the endless movement of trucks and workers. The whole country felt alive, almost electric. This energy slowly began to spread across the ocean. Convoys reached Britain with more goods. Soldiers at the front lines received more weapons. Airfields filled with new planes. Artillery shells arrived in great numbers. Medical supplies saved more lives. And most importantly, the people fighting in Europe and Africa began to believe something new. The enemy could be defeated. Perhaps this was the greatest gift the factories gave to the world. Hope. As production grew, new types of ships also appeared. Some were faster. Some were stronger. Some carried troops. Some carried fuel. Others carried tanks stacked like metal giants ready for war. But the Liberty ships remained the symbol of this movement. When a Liberty ship left the yard for the first time, its horn would blow loudly. Workers stood and cheered as the ship entered the water. Some threw their hats in the air. Some cried. Some simply stood in silence, watching their hard work float away toward its destiny. A Liberty ship was more than metal. It was a message, a promise, a signal that freedom still had strength. It carried not just supplies, but the spirit of the workers who built it. And when those ships crossed the ocean, Germany felt their presence, not just in numbers but in what those numbers meant. The Nazis had believed that America was weak, slow, and unprepared. But now they watched as an entire nation rose with incredible force. And this force was still growing. The force was still growing, and with each passing month, it became clearer that America had transformed into something the world had never seen before. This was not an army, not a navy, not an air force. This was an enormous industrial storm. A storm made of machines, workers, steel, energy, and belief. A storm that moved across the land with the speed of progress and across the ocean with the power of endless production. As Liberty ships increased in number, German intelligence tried to understand how this was happening. They sent spies, gathered reports, and studied photographs from American newspapers. But the truth shocked them. America was not building ships faster because it had one brilliant plan or one powerful leader. America was building ships faster because millions of people decided that failure was not an option. It was a national promise. Inside the shipyards, the mood was not always cheerful. There were tough days, dangerous days, days when machines broke or accidents happened, days when exhaustion made hands shake and legs weak. Some workers were injured. Some never came home. The work was hard and risky. But even on those days, the shipyards did not fall silent. Others stepped forward. Others filled the gaps. Others worked longer shifts. In many yards, a worker's absence was met with quiet respect, and with even greater effort from everyone else. People understood something simple: stopping for even one day could cost lives far away. The rhythm of production became its own kind of music. A deep, pounding song of industry. Sparks snapping like firecrackers. Hammer strikes echoing like drums. Welding torches hissing like snakes. Engines running like a steady heartbeat. This music filled the ears of millions, and though it was loud and harsh, it carried a strange beauty, the beauty of purpose. Many workers said that in those years they rarely felt lonely. The shipyards were full of energy, full of voices, full of shared struggle. People laughed together, argued together, worked side by side, and ate meals in crowded halls filled with the smell of soup and iron dust. They shared stories, shared fears, shared dreams of what the world might look like once peace returned. Some friendships formed that lasted a lifetime. Some romances began in break rooms or during late-night shifts. The war factories, for all their noise and danger, were also filled with human warmth. They were not just places where steel was shaped, they were places where hope was shaped too. And the workers knew that every ship they built was not just another object. It was something alive with meaning. Something that reached across oceans. Inside government offices in Washington, military leaders watched the numbers from the factories with amazement. Charts filled with rising lines. Reports showing huge jumps in production. Every month seemed to break the previous month's record. Tank numbers doubled. Aircraft numbers soared. Ammunition production multiplied. The war factories were doing more than expected. Much more. In meetings, officers often said, "Keep going." Politicians said, "More. Faster." The people said, "We will." But even then, the full effect of this industrial storm was not clear. The battlefields were far away. The Atlantic was wide. Germany still held much of Europe. It was not obvious whether all this production would be enough. Then something changed, quietly at first. In 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic began to shift. Allied ships started making the crossing more safely. Convoys reached Britain with fewer losses. U-boats that once felt like hunters now felt hunted. Radar improved. Aircraft coverage extended farther. Escort ships became more deadly. And behind all of this was the simple fact that there were now too many Liberty ships for the Germans to stop. Even if they destroyed one, two more soon replaced it. The ocean lanes, once dark and dangerous, started to glow with the movement of Allied vessels. The German naval commander Karl Donitz, who led the U-boat fleet, realized the truth. He later wrote that American shipbuilding power was beyond anything they had predicted. He understood that numbers alone could win battles. And America now controlled the numbers. Meanwhile, American workers at home often did not know the details of the war. They only saw newspaper headlines, letters from soldiers, or government messages. But sometimes someone would bring a story into the factory. A convoy had reached Britain safely. An Allied victory was reported in North Africa. Supplies had helped win a battle in Italy. Hospital ships had saved thousands. When workers heard these stories, they felt something deep inside, like a small flame growing stronger. They felt connected to those victories. They felt responsible. They felt proud. And across the ocean, soldiers understood too. Many soldiers wrote letters home saying, "Tell the factory workers thank you." Some said, "Your work saved my life." Some said, "We would not be here without you." These words traveled back across the sea, through mailbags and trains, and reached the homes of welders, riveters, machine operators, and inspectors. When families read these letters, they sometimes cried. They told their neighbors. They carried the letters to work and pinned them on walls. They shared them during lunch breaks. These messages reminded everyone why they were fighting so hard. In the midst of all this, Germany was beginning to feel real pressure. Its factories were bombed. Supplies were shrinking. Fuel was harder to find. Tanks sat idle because they had no engines. Planes could not fly because there was no gasoline. Soldiers at the front lines complained that they were running out of ammunition. The Nazi leaders looked at their numbers and saw disaster. Their production lines were failing while America's were soaring. They watched as more Allied ships arrived in Europe, bringing more soldiers, more weapons, more tanks. They watched as the skies filled with Allied aircraft. It became clear, they were not just fighting armies. They were fighting the greatest industrial engine in history. The factories at home shaped the future of every battle. When American forces landed in North Africa, their tanks had been built by men and women in the Midwest. When Allied planes flew over Europe, their fuel had come from refineries across the United States. When soldiers hit the beaches of Sicily, their landing crafts had been welded together in coastal factories. Every victory carried the fingerprints of workers far from the front lines. But there was still much to do. The war was far from over. Germany was still strong. Its army still controlled much of Europe. Its soldiers still fought fiercely. Its leaders refused to surrender. The Allies needed even more supplies, more ships, more tanks, more planes. And so America pushed harder. In the shipyards, new records were set. A ship was once built in just over 4 days. Another was built even faster. Newspapers proudly shared these stories, calling them miracles of production. But for the workers, it was not a miracle. It was sweat, skill, sacrifice, and teamwork. It was waking up before sunrise and going home long after sunset. It was hands blistered from tools, shoulders stiff from lifting steel, eyes burning from sparks. It was the determination to keep going, no matter how tired they felt. And that determination spread. Even people who did not work in factories found ways to help. Farmers grew more crops. Rail workers moved supplies faster. Teachers volunteered for community programs. Nurses trained for war hospitals. Everyone felt responsible. This unity was perhaps America's strongest weapon. A divided nation could never have built such a force. But a united nation could achieve the impossible. By late 1943, the impact was visible across Europe. The Allies had more ships than ever before. More supplies reached the front lines. More troops landed in Italy. More air raids struck enemy factories. Germany was being pushed back, slowly, painfully, but steadily. And far away from the battles, deep inside the shipyards and factories, workers continued their endless rhythm. They did not see the front lines, but they felt connected to them. They imagined every shell they made helping a soldier survive. Every ship they built helping a convoy succeed. Every plane they constructed helping the skies stay free. They understood, even without being told, that victory depended on them. In many ways, the war factories became a symbol of what ordinary people can do when they share a purpose. They proved that power does not always come from weapons alone. It also comes from unity, effort, and belief. And that power was about to change the course of the war in ways even more dramatic than before. As 1944 approached, the full power of America's war factories was beginning to show. The world was changing faster than anyone had expected. The ocean, once dark and deadly, now carried more Allied ships than ever before. The skies, once filled with danger, now held strong formations of Allied aircraft. And on land, the armies of the United States, Britain, and their allies were getting ready for something huge, something that would finally turn the pressure back on Nazi Germany. This moment was building for years, quietly and steadily in the factories back home. Long before soldiers landed on the beaches of France, long before tanks rolled through destroyed towns, and long before the cities of Germany shook under bombing raids, the true beginning of the end came from the loud and fiery heart of American industry. It came from glowing furnaces, from the steady hammering of steel, from the tired hands of workers who refused to stop. D-Day was about to happen. And without the Liberty ships, D-Day may never have happened at all. To understand why, we must picture something incredible: an entire invasion force crossing the English Channel. Thousands of ships, troop ships, cargo ships, landing crafts, destroyers, medical ships, fuel carriers, all moving together across a narrow stretch of water. It was the largest amphibious operation in the history of the world. And behind them, supplying them, feeding them, carrying their tanks and weapons, were the ships America had built back home. The Liberty ships. Each one carried enough equipment to support thousands of soldiers. Some carried tanks. Some carried jeeps. Some carried trucks filled with food and medical kits. Some carried ammunition stacked from floor to ceiling. Without these ships, the soldiers would have arrived with nothing. No fuel. No guns. No vehicles. No supplies to continue the fight. Every ship that approached France on that day was a reminder of the work done months, and sometimes years, beforehand. Every crate unloaded on the beaches had passed through the hands of dozens of workers. The person who welded the steel, the person who inspected the cargo, the person who sealed the crate, the person who loaded it onto the ship. These workers never saw the beaches of Normandy, but their fingerprints were everywhere. As soldiers fought their way across France, more Liberty ships arrived behind them, one after another, like a never-ending lifeline. Supplies flowed across the ocean like a river of steel and hope. Even when the fighting grew fierce and the roads broke apart, the ships kept coming. No matter how strong the German defenses were, they could not stop this tide. And deep inside Germany, the Nazi leadership was starting to understand the truth. They had been confident at the beginning of the war. Their armies were fast. Their weapons were modern. Their tactics were powerful. They believed they could defeat any nation before it had time to react. But they were wrong about one thing. They were wrong about America. They believed America was soft. They believed Americans lacked discipline. They believed the country could not endure the hardship of total war. They believed democracy made nations slow and weak. But America showed something different. It showed that a free people working together voluntarily could be stronger than any dictatorship. It showed that unity built on hope is more powerful than unity built on fear. It showed that factories powered by free workers can outproduce factories powered by force. Day by day, the numbers told the story. In 1944 alone, American factories built over 96,000 aircraft, almost 30,000 tanks, hundreds of thousands of trucks, and dozens more Liberty ships every month. These numbers were not only impressive, they were overwhelming. Germany could not match them. Japan could not match them. No nation in history had seen production on this scale. Inside Germany, factories were bombed, transport lines cut, and resources lost. Workers struggled as the war dragged on. The country tried to increase production, but it was too late. America's industrial engine was too big. It could not be stopped. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Europe, Germany tried one last desperate attack in the winter of 1944. This became known as the Battle of the Bulge. It was a fierce surprise strike meant to break the Allied lines and force a peace negotiation. For a few days, the situation looked dangerous. The weather was freezing. Snow covered the forest. Roads became icy and blocked. Soldiers suffered in the cold. And still, the Liberty ships came. They carried warm clothes, fuel, ammunition, food, and replacement vehicles. They brought what the soldiers needed to survive the harsh winter. They carried new tanks that rolled into the battlefield and turned the tide of the fight. They made sure that the Allied armies did not break. Some soldiers later said that they would not have survived without the endless stream of supplies. And those supplies came from the hands of workers who never saw the front lines, but still fought through every hour of cold nights and long days inside the factories. After the winter battle failed, the German army grew weaker day by day. Its strength was fading. Its weapons were fewer. Its soldiers were exhausted. Its fuel was almost gone. And still, America built more. Liberty ships lined up across the Atlantic like a steel bridge from one continent to another. American factories were not slowing down, they were speeding up. The workers seemed to sense that the end was near and pushed even harder. Meanwhile, German U-boat commanders realized they could no longer win the war at sea. Their submarines were being hunted more effectively. Their losses were rising. Some U-boats barely made it back to port. Others never returned at all. The once powerful U-boat fleet was now a shadow of what it had been. And the reason was simple. The Liberty ships had defeated them, not by fighting but by replacing any loss faster than Germany could cause it. By early 1945, Germany's situation was hopeless. Allied forces were closing in from both the east and the west. Bombs fell on German cities. Tanks rolled through once strong defenses. The Nazi leadership tried to encourage its people, but it was clear the war was lost. In April 1945, Adolf Hitler died. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. And when it ended, many people looked back on the long journey and realized something important. The victory had not come only from the battlefield. It had come from the factories, from the shipyards, from the workers, from the endless flow of supplies that traveled across the ocean on the steel decks of Liberty ships. When the war was finally over, some shipyards closed. The sparks stopped flying. The machines went silent. The workers returned home, many unsure of what the future held. They had given everything for the war effort, and now they stepped into a quieter world. But some things did not disappear. The friendships, the pride, the memories of working through the hardest years of their lives, the knowledge that their hands had helped save nations. And the Liberty ships, many of them continued to serve for years. They became cargo ships, training vessels, even floating museums. A few still exist today, carefully maintained so people can walk their decks and imagine the history that flowed across those planks. If you stand beside one, you can feel something powerful. You can feel the weight of history. You can imagine the workers who shaped the steel. You can picture the convoys moving across the cold Atlantic. You can almost hear the echoes of the factories where sparks once flew like stars. Those echoes are part of a story that shaped the modern world. When the war ended, the world began to catch its breath. Cities that had been destroyed started to rebuild. Families who had been separated finally came together again. Soldiers returned home, some with medals, others with memories too heavy to talk about. The world was full of relief, sadness, and hope all at once. But far from the battlefields and ruined cities, something else was happening back in America. The war factories, which had once burned with constant fire and noise, began to quiet down. Their huge doors closed. Their machines cooled. Their floors, once crowded with workers, slowly emptied. It felt almost strange. For years, these factories had been alive, like giant metal creatures breathing fire and steel. They had created the weapons of victory. They had worked without rest, without pause, day and night. And now they stood silent. Some workers walked through the empty halls after their final shifts. They placed their hands on the machines that had been their partners in the fight. They remembered the long nights, the laughter, the exhaustion, the songs people sang to keep their spirits high. They remembered the pride they felt each time a Liberty ship slid into the water. Many realized that they would never experience something like this again. But even as silence filled the buildings, the impact of their work continued to echo across the world. Because the victory in World War II had many causes: bravery, strategy, sacrifice, and courage. But one of the greatest causes was industrial power. The ability to produce more, faster, and smarter than the enemy. The ability to turn factories into engines of freedom. The ability to build a steel armada that crossed oceans and crushed the hopes of a dangerous empire. Germany had expected a long war. It expected to control the seas with U-boats. It expected to break the supply lines. It expected to starve its enemies. But it never expected what America became. It never expected that ordinary citizens, farmers, teachers, housewives, students, retired workers, would become the heroes of production. It never expected that a free country could unite so strongly. It never expected that a nation known for peace could turn into the greatest industrial force in history. This surprised even the Allies. It surprised even America itself. When the war began, many people doubted if the country could build enough to survive. But by the end of the war, America had produced more equipment, more ships, more planes, and more supplies than any other nation on Earth. And what happened after the war is just as important. The knowledge gained from these war factories helped shape the modern world. The methods invented by Henry Kaiser and other industrial leaders, speed, mass production, teamwork, assembly line shipbuilding, changed how industries worked forever. The shipyards taught engineers new ways to cut costs and save time. Women proved they could excel in heavy industry, opening doors for future generations. African American workers gained new skills and opportunities that helped fuel the civil rights movement. The factories had done more than build ships. They had built the future. But there is something deeper in this story, something that goes beyond numbers and production lines. Something human. Something emotional. Something worth remembering. It is the story of how people find strength in impossible times. It is the story of how unity can overcome fear. It is the story of how millions of small actions can shape history. Think about the workers in the shipyards. Most of them did not see themselves as heroes. They were not in the headlines. They did not stand in front of cheering crowds. They did not wear medals. They woke up early, put on their boots, and went to work. They came home tired, sometimes too tired to speak. They ate simple meals, kissed their children goodnight, and returned to the factories again. They lived through years of sacrifice without expecting praise. Yet their work saved lives. Their work fed armies. Their work fueled victory. This is the quiet kind of heroism that often goes unnoticed, the heroism of patience, discipline, and commitment. On the other side of the world, soldiers often thought about these unseen heroes. They knew their bullets, their food, their bandages, their vehicles, even their boots came from the hands of workers who would never meet them. When soldiers wrote letters home, many of them thanked the workers directly. They understood that their survival depended on strangers working thousands of miles away. This invisible bond between the front lines and the home front became one of the most powerful forces in the war. A soldier might have felt alone in a foxhole, but behind him stood a whole nation. The same was true across the Atlantic. People in Britain often said that American ships saved their island. Without the endless flow of supplies during the darkest years, Britain might have fallen. It was the Liberty ships, crossing the dangerous ocean again and again, that helped keep the nation alive. This is why history remembers them, not for their beauty, not for their speed, but for their purpose. They were simple ships built for a simple mission, carry enough to keep freedom alive. And they did. If you walk inside one of the remaining Liberty ships today, you can feel the past in every corner. You can run your hand along the cold metal railing and know that a worker once welded it with tired hands. You can stand in the cargo hold and imagine it filled with tanks or crates marked rations. You can climb the stairs to the deck and picture sailors scanning the horizon for U-boats. The ship does not speak, but it carries the weight of thousands of memories. The war factories, too, live on in different ways. Some became modern industrial plants. Some were torn down. Some became museums. But the energy they once held, the determination, the unity, the courage, still feels alive in the stories they left behind. There is a lesson here, a lesson that reaches far beyond war. It shows that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they work together. That teamwork can turn fear into strength. That unity can change the course of history. That no nation is truly helpless as long as its people believe in themselves. It also reminds us that freedom is not protected by weapons alone. It is protected by the hands that build, repair, create, and support. It is protected by people who choose to contribute even when no one is watching. Sometimes the loudest victories come from the quietest workers. As America stepped into the post-war era, its industrial strength continued to grow. New highways were built. New technologies appeared. New industries rose. The same spirit that powered the war factories helped power a new age of innovation and prosperity. Children grew up hearing stories about Liberty ships and factories that never slept. Some of those children later became engineers, builders, leaders, and thinkers. They carried the spirit of determination into the future. Even today, when we look at the world around us, our transportation networks, our global trade, our engineering achievements, we can see the long shadow of those war factories. They taught us what human beings are capable of when they believe in something larger than themselves. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all is this: history is not only shaped by those who fight on the front lines. It is shaped by those who support them, by those who never give up, by those who work quietly, stubbornly, bravely. In the end, the Liberty ships were not just steel vessels. They were symbols of unity. They were reminders that freedom, once threatened, can be defended by the strength of ordinary hands. The workers may not have heard the explosions on the battlefield. They may not have seen the enemy face to face. But without them, victory would have been impossible. The steel armada they built did more than cross the ocean. It crushed the hopes of a dangerous empire. It protected the future of free nations. It changed the world. As the last months of the war unfolded, America's war factories continued to work with the same determination that had carried them through the darkest years. But now, something felt different in the air. People could sense the end coming. Newspapers spoke of Allied victories across Europe. Radios carried reports of German retreats. The world, which had once seemed trapped in fear, was slowly opening its eyes to hope. Yet the work did not stop. Inside the shipyards, workers pushed just as hard as they had before. Even though Germany was weakening, they didn't allow themselves to relax. They knew that a single shortage of supplies could cost lives. They knew that victory depended on steady hands and steady production. The Liberty ships kept sailing. The factories kept glowing. The machines kept roaring. And across the Atlantic, the effect was clear. German forces were running out of everything: fuel, weapons, spare parts, even food. Their factories had been bombed. Their railways broken. Their soldiers exhausted. They faced an enemy that grew stronger each month because its supply lines were endless. Those supply lines were the Liberty ships. The steel armada that Hitler never believed America could build. As Allied troops moved deeper into Europe, they discovered how stretched and starved the German war machine had become. Tanks with no gasoline. Trucks abandoned. Artillery with no shells. The once powerful Nazi empire was collapsing under its own weight, and under the weight of America's production. Finally, in the spring of 1945, the fighting came to an end. Germany surrendered. Its leaders were gone. Its armies broken. The war in Europe was over. Around the world, people celebrated in the streets. Flags waved from windows. Church bells rang. Families hugged returning soldiers. After years of fear, the world finally breathed again. And far from the cheering crowds, in the quiet corners of the shipyards, workers took a moment to reflect on what they had done. Many had never left their hometowns. Many had never seen a battlefield. Yet they understood, perhaps more deeply than anyone, that they had played a part in this victory. Their hands had shaped the ships that fed armies, saved countries, and crushed the enemy's hope. The Liberty ships, simple and strong, became symbols of what people can do when they stand together. They were built by welders, riveters, mothers, fathers, students, immigrants, retirees, people who decided that they would not let fear decide the future. The factories grew quiet after the war, but their legacy did not fade. The skills learned, the teamwork, the speed, the new technologies, helped rebuild the world. Women continued to work in industries. African American workers pushed for equality. Engineers used wartime ideas to build peacetime inventions. America's economy grew faster than ever before. The spirit that powered the war factories helped power the future. Even today, when a Liberty ship is restored and open to the public, people step onto the deck and feel something special. The steel is cold, but the story is warm. You can imagine the glow of the old shipyards. You can imagine the sweat on the workers' faces. You can imagine the long journey across the Atlantic, through danger and darkness. You can imagine the hope those ships carried. In the end, the story of America's war factories is not just about machines or numbers. It is about people. Ordinary people who showed extraordinary strength. People who proved that courage can be quiet. That heroism can happen far from the front lines. That unity can defeat even the most powerful enemies. The steel armada they built did more than win a war. It shaped the world we live in. As peace settled over the world, many people began to look back and wonder how such a massive victory had been possible. They saw the battles. They remembered the leaders. They spoke of bravery and sacrifice. But slowly, people also began to understand something deeper. Victory had been built long before the first soldier stepped onto a battlefield. It was built in the factories. In the months after the war, leaders from Europe visited the United States. They toured the shipyards that had once launched Liberty ships every few days. They walked through giant hangars where rows of planes had been assembled. They saw the long assembly lines where bullets and shells were once produced in endless streams. And everywhere they went, they asked the same question: how did you do this? The answer was simple: the workers. The workers who put down their normal lives and picked up new skills. The workers who stayed awake during night shifts while their families slept. The workers who carried the weight of a nation on their backs. The workers who believed that freedom was worth fighting for, even if they never held a gun. America's industrial miracle was not created by one person. It was created by millions. And the Liberty ships were the clearest symbol of that miracle. One historian later wrote, "Every Liberty ship carried the heartbeat of the American home front." It was true. Each ship carried not just supplies, but the emotions of the people who built it: fear, hope, determination, pride. Inside Germany after the war, the remaining officers also spoke about the Liberty ships. Many admitted something they had never said publicly during the war: the ships had broken their strategy. Their U-boats, once powerful and feared, had become almost helpless in the face of endless supply. One German naval officer said, "We sank ships. But America replaced them faster than we could fire our torpedoes." This was not an exaggeration. It was the truth. America's factories did not just support the war, they overwhelmed it. Years later, when veterans returned to visit the old shipyards, they sometimes found rusted cranes and empty fields. But if they closed their eyes, they could still remember the noise, the sparks, the voices shouting orders across the metal decks. They could still hear the rumble of a newly finished ship sliding into the water. They could still feel the pride. Some former workers saved small pieces of steel from the shipyards. Others kept their old helmets or gloves as reminders. Many passed down stories to their children and grandchildren, stories of working in the cold, of welding under bright blue sparks, of building something bigger than themselves. These stories taught a valuable lesson. Great achievements often come from ordinary people doing ordinary tasks with extraordinary commitment. And this is why the Liberty ships deserve to be remembered. They were not glamorous. They were not fast. They were not beautiful. But they were exactly what the world needed: reliable, strong, simple ships that carried hope across a dangerous sea. They helped feed nations. They helped rebuild Europe. They helped end a brutal war. They proved that unity can win even against darkness. Today, only a few Liberty ships remain afloat. They serve as floating museums, reminders of a time when the world stood on the edge of disaster, and was pulled back by the hands of industrial heroes. People walk their decks and imagine what it must have been like. They picture the North Atlantic storms, the U-boats lurking beneath the waves, the long convoys stretching across the horizon. And behind all that, they imagine the workers back home, tired, sweating, pushing through the night to build one more ship. Those workers may never have seen the war up close, but they helped end it. The end of the war did not erase the scars it left behind. Cities lay in ruins. Families mourned loved ones who would never return. Soldiers carried memories they wished they could forget. But through all this sorrow, one truth shined clearly: the world had been saved from a terrible future. And part of that salvation had sailed across the ocean on the steel decks of Liberty ships. In the years that followed, historians studied the conflict from every angle. They examined battle strategies, politics, and leadership. They looked at weapons and tactics. But no matter how deep they dug, they always returned to one powerful reality. America's industrial strength was a turning point. The war factories had become as important as any battlefield. The people who worked inside them had changed history. They didn't fight with guns or stand on the front lines, but their contribution was just as vital. If the factories had been slower, the war would have lasted longer. If the shipyards had produced fewer ships, the Atlantic might have closed. If the Liberty ships had not been built at such incredible speed, Europe might have fallen. Every rivet, every weld, every shift mattered. Veterans often visited schools and told students that the home front was the hidden hero of the war. They explained how supplies kept them alive, how tanks and jeeps gave them strength, how endless ammunition allowed them to defend themselves. Many said, "We fought on the battlefield, but America fought behind us." This idea, that victory was shared, became one of the most important lessons for future generations. Over time, the story of the Liberty ships took on a new meaning. It became a story not just about war but about human determination. It proved that even in the darkest moments, people can rise to the challenge. It showed that ordinary citizens can do extraordinary things when they work together for a greater good. It also taught the world about the power of freedom. In Nazi Germany, workers were forced to work. In America, workers chose to work. They chose to join the shipyards. They chose to stay late. They chose to push through exhaustion. They chose to believe that their effort mattered. That choice, the choice made millions of times by millions of people, became stronger than any weapon the enemy possessed. And today, when people talk about World War II, they remember those battles, those heroes, and those sacrifices. But they also remember something else: the steel giants that carried victory across the sea. The Liberty ships. They were the heartbeat of a nation. The bridge between freedom and danger. The lifeline that never broke. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear them even now. The deep sound of engines turning, the waves hitting the hull, the distant echo of horns as they left the docks. You can imagine the brave sailors standing on the deck, scanning the dark water for danger. You can imagine the heavy crates inside the cargo hold, each one tied to a soldier's survival. And behind those ships, far away on the shore, you can imagine the workers. Men and women walking into the factory at sunrise. Sparks jumping from welding torches. The clang of steel echoing through the air. Someone shouting instructions. Someone wiping sweat from their face. Someone humming a tune to stay awake during a long night shift. Even though the world is quiet now, their echoes remain. The war factories taught us that unity can overcome tyranny. They taught us that strength comes from people, not from machines alone. And they taught us that even the greatest threats can be defeated when a nation stands together. The steel armada that America built did more than crush Nazi hopes. It proved that hope itself, when forged by millions of hands, can become stronger than any enemy. When we look back on those years now, it is easy to see the tanks, the planes, the battles, the leaders. It is easy to think of war only as explosions and soldiers and strategy. But sometimes the real story lies far behind the noise. Sometimes, it lies in places where no bullets were fired and no flags were raised. In this war, that place was the factory floor. It was there, among the sparks and steel, that America found its greatest strength. It was there that men and women discovered courage they never knew they had. It was there that nights turned into mornings without rest, and mornings turned into long days of determination. It was there, in the heart of the homeland, that freedom grew strong enough to cross oceans. Think again of the Liberty ships, simple, square, gray ships built for one purpose: to keep hope alive. They did not look powerful. They did not look fast. They did not look special. But sometimes, history is changed by the things that do not look powerful at all. Because real power often comes from consistency. From unity. From steady hands doing steady work. From millions of people choosing to care. Those ships carried more than supplies. They carried trust. The trust that every worker placed into every piece of steel. They carried belief. The belief that their nation could rise above fear. They carried sacrifice. The long nights, the tired eyes, the aching backs of people who refused to give up. They carried freedom. And they delivered it. When the war ended, many Liberty ships were retired. Some were turned into scrap. Some were repurposed for trade. A few were saved, But all of them, even the ones no longer floating, left behind a legacy that cannot rust. Their story remains in the textbooks, in the museums, in the memories of older generations. It remains in the strength of industries built after the war. It remains in the idea that ordinary people can rise together and do the extraordinary. Walk into a Liberty ship today, one of the few still alive, and the air feels heavy with history. The steel walls carry the sound of old footsteps. The engine room still smells faintly of oil. The deck creaks softly under your weight. You can almost hear the sea. You can almost imagine the ships sailing in long lines across the Atlantic, carrying the hope of a nation. You can almost feel the pride of the workers who built them. And maybe, as you stand there, you understand something important. Victory in World War II was not only won by generals or armies. It was won by welders, riveters, nurses, drivers, machinists, farmers, builders, dreamers. It was won by people who believed that their small actions mattered, even when the world felt too big, too dark, too dangerous. History often remembers the leaders. But the Liberty ships remind us to remember the workers. The men and women who stepped into the fire and forged peace. The men and women who turned factories into weapons. The men and women whose courage was quiet but enormous. This is their story, one of unity, strength, and belief. A story of a steel armada built not by kings or generals, but by ordinary people. A story that proves hope is stronger than fear, and freedom stronger than tyranny. And so, as the last Liberty ship rests in the water today, rocking gently on calm waves, it carries not just its own history, but the story of millions who shaped the world. Their hands built the ships. Their spirit won the war. And their legacy will sail on, far beyond the horizon.